So this is a huge question for lots of people right now. It feels like we were once unified and now we are splitting among ourselves. And a lot of this are internal fractures, really, based on essentially the stories that we have about the pandemic. And I guess for me, it is part of my job to have conversations with vaccine hesitant families, and not just about the COVID vaccine, but generally about protecting their children. And this is a very, very emotional thing. So it's important to understand that, firstly, keeping story first and foremost, and also respecting someone's story and waiting until they're ready to to have that discussion is important. But at the same time, there's that, I guess, that sense of urgency as well, which is definitely affecting especially the Māori and Pacific community, who have seen this kind of thing before. They've had to deal with pandemics before, and they've also got to deal with, I guess, a lot of feelings that they have, which are very conflicted about their interaction with the health system and with government in general in this country. And I acknowledge the fear and hesitancy and the mistrust that is driving a lot of this hesitancy. And I know I also set this very differently from people that I guess, have access to the right information, and have had time to process it, but still choose not to go with it for various reasons. So here are a few things I've learned, and these are conversations that anyone can have, definitely not just a health professional. These are tools for everyone. So here are the words you're going to use: connection, compassion, and commitment. And there's one final word, which I'm going to repeat, and that word is protection. So you don't need much knowledge about COVID. You don't need to be a doctor or a scientist. You just need to have a connection with that person that you are talking to as a friend or as a family member. It's important to know, and we'll go into this later, that these conversations can use a lot of energy. So make sure that you have the resource to have that conversation at that time. It's okay not to have that conversation right away. You have to have the resources. And also, you don't have to do it for everyone. Make sure that you have those conversations, give the time and energy to the people that you love most. And these are the steps. Firstly, you need to identify if that person is actually keen for the vaccine, but they just haven't had time to access it. If they're a fence sitter, if they're hesitant, and this is the majority of people that haven't had the vaccine. And the third group are the people that absolutely don't want to talk about it. They're completely against it. They've already thought about it. They are not keen. They're not on the fence at all. So if they're keen, obviously find out why they haven't got it. Is it because they need transport? Is it because they're a little bit needle phobic and they just need a friend to hold their hand? That kind of thing. You can be that person. If they're hesitant, then this is where your connection is really, really important. Ask them if they want to talk about it. Maybe they're scared. Maybe they've heard something and you can help find the right information for them. Maybe they've got a health issue or a past response that they're really frightened of repeating. And again, you can help them access the right information, the right advice. Maybe they're in a social group where someone is spreading fear and misinformation, and you can help get them out of that social group and see a new environment. You are their friend and their family member, and you can ask open-ended questions, not be judgmental, by being compassionate, by listening, and you might be able to pull them a little way towards seeing clearly for themselves that it's okay to change their story about what the vaccine is. If they're completely against it, then you also have a role, and that is to make sure that you maintain your connection with them without judgment. Don't talk about the vaccine, talk about all the other things that you love together. Keep the friendship and the love open for the next time. Maybe if they do have second thoughts, you are the first person that they'll go to. So going back to the vaccine hesitant group, I'm going to use that word protection again. So this is the word that you use constantly. So for example, if they're scared or if they've got a piece of information, misinformation, and it is entrenching them in their views, then sometimes if you actually directly challenge that with some other piece of information, you're actually going to entrench them further in their views, because it threatens their sense of self. It's called cognitive dissonance. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to challenge their sense of self. You want to focus on what the benefits of vaccination are, and that is protection. That is protection for themselves, for the people they love, including their elderly and their children, protection for their community that they draw strength from, and also protection for our country and our way of life that we love, and all the things, including the arts, that make life worth living. If you sense that they haven't yet accepted the misinformation, and they're actually just seeking more knowledge, then there are actually a lot of things that you can help them access. For example, trustworthy websites, including the covid19.govt.nz website, which actually contains a heap of information and is constantly updated with new research evidence. There's really great journalists and scientists writing, for example, Susie Wiles in The Spin-Off, or you can find a trusted person that knows a little bit more, just to have a chat to them. So there are lots of things. I can say that there are very few medical conditions that actually completely rule out vaccination, especially now that there are actually several different vaccination choices. Once you've provided that information or support, follow up to check on how they're feeling. Do they need any more help? How do they now feel about protecting their whānau? I think what you'll find is that that strength of connection is what will do it in the end. So, I mean, I'm a doctor. I don't have the same power that you do with your friends or loved ones, because you've known them longer, you know what drives them, and they love you back. So make sure that you go in and you spend the time. It's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take a few goes probably, but you might be enough to break that circuit of fear and misinformation and to protect them.
Well, if we keep up the theme of stories, the narrative through 2020 was really a coherent narrative. It was the team of 5 million will eliminate COVID from Aotearoa. And of course, there are many subtexts to that story, and, you know, are we a team of 5 million or all that? But actually, that was the story of 2020. And it was a successful story. In terms of epidemiology, we absolutely crushed that curve. But a pandemic works along a certain line, and it's a virus and you can't fight it forever. And so this new stage of the story is much more fractured, because it's, you know, in epidemiological terms, it's a suppression strategy. It's learning to live with the virus, and we are differently equipped to live with the virus depending on how big our house is, how much money we've got, you know, whether we're a victim of racism over 200, 500 years. So the inequity is really marked now, and that is painful to us. This is a very painful story to be part of. And within that is the kind of polarization and the bitterness of the vaccine conversations and the vaccine mandate. I think it's helpful from a health promotion point of view, because, you know, inequity is just such a blight on public health in this country. It was before the pandemic, and the pandemic's thrown it into relief. So I do think about those models of health, Mason Jury's Te Whare Tapawha, Te Pai Mahitonga. Both of them, they're different images. He's a storyteller, Mason Jury. These are images. The one is the Southern Cross, one is the whare, but actually health happens in the space. And in the space, we have to negotiate how to be well together. And we did that relatively well in 2020, and we are finding that much harder conversation now. And I suppose that is why we're tired, and why we're really struggling with the fracturing of one big narrative, and the tension for me in that Te Pai Mahitonga between Ngā Manakura and the other one, which I always forget, mana whakahaere, between autonomy and community leadership. It's exactly what Renee's just been talking about. You know, why should I be vaccinated if I don't want to be vaccinated? Well, I should be vaccinated because it's good for all of us if I'm vaccinated. But that's a tension, you know, and so that is a tense story, and we can't override the multiple voices that we hear in that. So individual liberty, if I'm honest, I'm not really such a big fan. I think that my freedom is bound up with everyone else's freedom.
I think the concept of freedom and liberty is, as Lucy says, very based on where you are in the picture and what story you have for your community. So as Lucy has said, this is not a country that's been very good at practicing freedom and equity. And in actual fact, we've plastered over the cracks, but the cracks will always, underneath the ground, were always going to open up at this stage of the pandemic, because the containment regime has failed largely because our health system and our inequity has been going for decades, if not centuries, and that is actually what the problem is. And in actual fact, the vaccine rollout is also suffering from exactly the same blind spots and systemic biases that all the other health things are. So the big picture is this is more of the same, and that is exactly what our Māori leaders have been saying. And this time they are loud and clear determined that the outcome will be completely different, and we should all be supporting them. They have seen this coming from when COVID first hit last year, and they've been working so hard to be heard, to get the supports they need in place. They're finally getting some of it, but it's way too late. And so there are so many different stories. There's the story that we need to stay the course and listen to the government and trust it. And in some ways, I'm the center narrative. Then there's the narrative, we need individual liberty, the right to earn a living by opening my shop and welcoming people. I want to be able to see my friends and family from overseas because emotionally I need this for my health. That's a valid story as well. And that's what the people that are crying freedom are talking about. And again, I agree with Lucy. We have to recognize that story as valid in order for us to be able to have conversation. The third story is the one that is based on history and experience and centuries of inequity. And that's the story that drives the iwi up north who are talking about roadblocks, who are saying, please don't come and have your holiday with us. Please don't visit us. Even our friends and family who know what situation we're in and know how many people died in 1918, where they couldn't hold tangi for people because they were dying too fast and they needed to move on. We don't want that to happen to our community, because this is the lifeblood of our community, our customs and traditions and our beliefs that we have to put aside, and we are currently putting aside. And so those people should be given primacy as well. Their stories are very important because their stories underlie the history and the story of this country. So all three of those types of stories, and of course within that there are individual variations, they need to be listened to. However, I do disagree with the co-opting of words like freedom and liberty by various people for what I'm going to call it selfish reasons. I think these people maybe don't have an understanding of history. They don't understand that when you use words like freedom, freedom actually means freedom for myself and others. So if you have a right, you also have a responsibility. If you are saying, I have the right to self-determination, that term self-determination applies to a group of people, your community, but you are like, well, I have the right to determine my own destiny. What you mean is we have the right to determine our own destiny, and also determining our own destiny by its nature also means that you don't impact on the destiny of other people. You try to respect everybody's rights at the same time, because there is always a way forward. And I think for the purposes of this pandemic, there is a way forward, we're slowly finding it. We're going to make mistakes. There's going to be stupid stuff that happens that is the wrong way, and somebody's going to have to say, this is the wrong way. Okay, let's go back. Let's work out a different way. And that's what we're doing right now. And the more that we understand that there are different stories, that we have to work together, and that we can't all accept that all our stories will have primacy all the time, that's how we can work together to find our way. So there are deep cracks. There are ways to fill in those cracks with new earth and new roots, and that's what we need to do.
I think that's where art comes in, doesn't it? Because actually some of the best art, some of the best stories, theatre, opera, it leaves you emotionally drained, doesn't it? It takes you on an emotional journey. That's why we're drawn to it. And I am really interested in emotional literacy. And it's funny to say that in an English accent, because we are traditionally not, we don't operate on a wide emotional range. And certainly we've made a lot of jokes about that in Canterbury since the earthquake. And the wellbeing work that we were involved in was called All Right ? And the question mark starts a conversation about wellbeing. And traditionally, Cantabrians, the conversation goes, all right, all right. And actually, we're really interested in growing emotional literacy. And you're talking about being emotionally drained. And I can completely get that people in Tamaki Makaurau are at the moment. I mean, God, how many weeks of this? It really does do your head in. But actually, I think, I'm just reflecting on words, because that's what we've said we do. Drainage is really important. The reason why Otatahi was hit so badly by the earthquakes is because Pākehā built a city on a swamp. Ngāi Tahu said, not a good idea to build there. That is a braided river, effectively. And so if you build the wrong thing in the wrong place, it's gonna come to grief. But if you manage your emotions to the terrain, which is not easy, easier said than done, then we can come through this together. And so, this is a very sad, hard, tiring time, and we desperately need to take care of ourselves. And one of the other things that we've said in the All Right campaign all the way through is each of us is an expert in our own well-being. What makes me feel good is not necessarily what makes you feel good, but we need to respect that in each other, and we need to grow that expertise. So I think about the currency of poetry. Through this last few years, I have found workmates who will send me a poem when there's no other words, when it could be obscene or explicit or just deeply moving. Someone has so in order to drain the emotions and replenish the emotions and process them, art is great in that. And how do we deal with people who see things differently? Well, we all see things differently, and that's all right. There has to be that intrinsic respect, that some of my mates will run up the Port Hills every weekend for their well-being, and that would kill me. But I will potter about in my garden and smell the roses, and that will replenish me. I think we don't have to be on all the time. We have to trust each other. We have to have relationships where we can say, actually, not today. And so that's the negotiation that we're part of, and that's the collective story, isn't it? And I really don't want to sound trite, because there have been some very bleak times for all of us over the last year, but there have also been many little joys, and I am a big fan of mining the moments of joy.
So I completely agree with Lucy about taking the time for yourself, making sure that whatever you choose to relax, it is for you and not because someone told you it was good for you. And also being kind to yourself and saying, no, I don't have time, I don't have space, I don't have emotional energy right now. And there's this beautiful metaphor I read about, which is about a quiet. when a choir sings and sustains a note for a long time, it's not because everyone is singing full blast for that whole period. The people in the choir are, when you run out of breath, you stop singing and you take a breath and rest while the other people in that choir keep singing. And by doing that, you sustain that note for as long as it takes. And I think it's important to recognize that we are working together, we are part of a team, and it's not just up to you to make that difference. So on the days where you can't, say no. Say, I'm going to tap out now, see you later. I need to take some time to look after myself. There's also the good enough principle. So you don't need to be the best person, the best creative, the best doctor, the best mother, the best dad that you possibly can be all the time. You can just be good enough that day and just do what it needs for that day to sustain whatever it is you're trying to sustain. That is going to be enough most of the time. The other thing is that remember that we are all human and we have power in our humanity and our connectedness and our ability to perceive stories and to hold them for each other. And again, there is no pressure in being able to do that. There are some days I get out of bed and I am not feeling human at all, and I take 2 coffees until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon to feel human, and that is okay too. And I'm sure it'll be a different thing for everyone. So again, don't let the I'm human, I know stories, I'm connected to people, don't let that pressure you. Just take that time, and remember that when you do choose to use that power, it'll be there.